So we have a lot of the floating. We also have a lot of walk and wade opportunities, and a lot of the times that's the draw to bring people to the mountains because they want to see, the hiking opportunities and everything like that. So I'm going to go through some of the walk wade stuff. In North Carolina, we've got a couple of other tailwater fisheries that we can actually wade. I'll be going over one of them specifically. North Carolina is notorious for having different water designations, and you've got to understand the rules and regulations, time of year, what you can and can't do, and going through an outfitters that, it's our job to understand and know these things makes the experience a lot easier for you guys too. And I'm going to cover some of those water designations that we have and we spend a lot of time on. So we have the tailwater stuff, we've got a lot of delayed harvest water, and then we've got what is referred to as wild water, or creek fishing. And one of the things to keep in mind with wading, some of the water that we have is really, really tricky to walk in. I'm not the most sure-footed person in the world. I do have a tendency to fall down just about every time I go out there. So mobility is really important. Don't go out there and expect to be able to walk up and down these rivers totally easily. You got to have your wits about you. You got to spend a little bit of extra time to be more cognizant of where you're putting your foot down. Right? So where I grew up, in Jackson County, it's about 45 minutes west of Asheville. One of the rivers that I spent a lot of time on is a tailwater fishery called the Lower Nantahala. And like the Watauga, like the South Holston, it stays a really frigid temperature year-round. One of my favorite things is going there in the middle of summer and going up through the gorge, and there's a tight ribbon of mist over top of the river only because of the temperature of that water is so different from the air temperature around. So it stays cold year-round, and that's one of the really big pluses with these rivers, because some of these rivers that we have, some of the small creeks, the ones that have to rely upon naturally occurring aquifers that rely upon rain, we might have a dry year sometimes. We're actually going through a drought right now in West North Carolina. We could stand to use some water, but the byproduct of that is sometimes it gets a little bit warm, and these waters will in turn get warm, and the fishing will suffer from that. So that's one of these big pluses for the tailwater fishers. It gets to stay cold year-round. It helps out an awful lot. Being a tailwater, it receives a fairly regular flow of water. You can set your watch by it on the Lower Nantahala right around 9:30 in the morning every single day. During peak season, you're going to expect to see water coming down. And unlike the Watauga, unlike the South Holston, once the water comes down, it's still totally wadable. Knowing where to go and where to step in and everything is certainly important, and having guides that understand that water is really important too. But it's still really, really accessible. And when everything else is kind of dying down and not really fishing to maybe your expectations of what trout fishing should be, a lot of these cold water fisheries can offer up that experience. The Lower Nantahala is fairly unpressured in comparison to a lot of the other waters that we have. It's 9 miles of water from the Nantahala Outdoor Center all the way up to the pump station where they draw water in from Nantahala Lake. And there's a lot of room there, lots of room. When you do go in the middle of the summer though, take some time to write down maybe on a couple of cards answers to how many fish have you caught today, what are you fishing for, and have you caught any or anything like that, because you will be bombarded by raft after raft after raft. It's the second most floated river in the United States behind the Colorado. So there's a lot of folks that are going down. If you can withstand the raft hatch, you're going to have a really good day. I've had opportunities out there where if the light's just right, boats will pass over rocks, and you can kind of lean in and look, and you'll see fish coming up and peppering the bottom of these boats, eating the boats that have been smeared across the bottom of the boat as it passes over rocks and everything. I've yelled at boats before the people that are rowing to, put your hands up, and they'll listen to you. They've been getting barked at by their guide all day, so they'll listen to you. They'll put their hands up, and they'll put those oars above their head, and you can pull fish out from underneath the boat. It's pretty fun sometimes. That river is really, really dynamic, but you have really excellent nymphing opportunities, a lot of dry fly opportunities. Forrest was mentioning the blue-winged olive hatch, and that is a river that's got a really, really good blue-winged olive hatch. Probably its most prolific hatch throughout the year. I've been out there in January and see them coming up through 2 feet of snow on the ground. And a lot of streamer opportunities too. A lot of these rivers have a really tremendous population of sculpin. It's a tiny little fish that moves around on the bottom. It's got a white belly, kind of tiger striped on its back. So if any of you have ever been in that river or in the rivers before and see them move around from rock to rock, that's a really good food source for some of these big fish. So being able to throw streamers for those fish can be it can be on fire, and I've converted many a fisherman from traditional gear to fly because they've had a tremendous streamer day out on the water. It's not as common occurrence as like a good nymphing or dry fly day, but it's there. These kinds of rivers is a fun way to test your skill if you feel like you're progressing through the sport and you want to pit some of your techniques that you've learned, the skills that you learned. It's a fun river to do that on. So, Wild Creek and wild water fishing. Growing up in Western North Carolina, this is where I spent probably the most time as a kid chasing these small wild rainbow trout and the native brook trout. It's a totally different experience, and some of these waters you can go and visit, and if you devote the time and energy to get in there, you feasibly can be casting with fish that have not seen a fly in a long time, if ever, but that takes a lot of work to get there. So this offers up different hiking opportunities. These fish are all wild. Everything that you catch in these rivers has zero outside influence. So that means the state hasn't come in and introduced anything. Every fish that you catch was, conceived, born, and raised in that watershed. So we've got native brook trout. Brook trout are actually not a trout. They are a salmonid species, but they're a type of salmonid called a char. Char is an old bass word for red, which is like the color of their, the sides, their flank going into their belly. But we have a lot of brook trout. And I think it's really important to mention that a lot of these trips, though available, we do a lot of these, keep in mind that mobility is really important. There have been instances where people will twist an ankle way far back and it's kind of difficult to get out. So keep that in mind. One of those things is to bring a waiting staff. That certainly helps out a lot. Not trying to deter you from it, but just keep in mind, be cognizant of that because it is a reality in these streams. But you can see in this picture, I'm kind of nestled up behind a rock and everything, all the overhang and everything. So the skills involved are a little bit more technical. So continuing on with this, April through November is typically the best time of year to be out there. And the reason why is, Forrest was mentioning earlier that fairly high elevations and wild water can get really, really cold. Sub 40 degrees. Just not too long ago, when you guys were experiencing the really cold day after really cold day and everything, these systems moving up the coast, we were getting bombarded with that same system. And we're having some of these really high altitude streams freeze up under 8 inches of ice. I talked to some folks that were well into their 90s and said they had never seen some of these rivers freeze like it did. Just to tell you that it happens. So these waters can get really, 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 really cold. So once we get into spring and summer, it starts to mellow out, stuff starts to thaw out, and that's when we see the first inklings of spring. A lot of bugs start to come back to life and these fish start reacting. One of the things, you're not going to experience some of these just bang up, amazing 50 plus fish days out on the tailwater. You're not going to get the quantity, but what you are going to get is the quality. You're going to get some of the most beautiful fish ever. They truly look like they came out of a saltwater aquarium. Some of these colors, it's just incredible. You can kind of tell from that picture of that's a really good representation of the average mean brook trout that we have. Just really brilliant colors.
And not particularly big fish.
And not particularly big either. I've been doing this for a very long time, and I just recently, in the last 2 years, landed a 13-inch wild brook trout, and that is the single largest brook trout I've ever landed. Before that was 11 inches personally, and that stood for many years. So just to give you an idea, they do not get big. but they are very aggressive. They are very opportunistic. I like working with folks that are coming into the shop and asking, well, what patterns really work well for the brook trout? Take your pick, man. If you want to dry fly, fish for them at certain times of the year, it's a lot of fun. Dry dropper is a lot of fun. Nymphing for them, they will eat a lot of different bugs. Like I was saying earlier, it's a technical fly fishing experience. You've got to be cognizant of everything that's going on around you. On that previous slide with all the dog hobble, rhododendron, mountain laurel, stuff like that, there's a lot of stuff that's kind of overhanging. For all intents and purposes, a lot of these streams are in temperate rainforests, places that receive a lot of rain.
Are they spring-fed?
A lot of them are, yeah. So I mentioned earlier the aquifers. They're these reservoirs underneath the ground that bubble up and create a lot of these streams.
What size rod do you use? It's not comparable.
There are a lot of different. I sit way outside of the. I'm going to preface this. I sit way outside that standard bell curve. I prefer to use a 10 and 11 foot rod in a lot of these streams because when you get into a situation where you got enough overhang, it negates the use of a false cast anyway. But there's a lot of folks, anything from 6.5 up to me personally, 11 feet. A lot of it has to do more with the,
And 2 to 4 weight.
Yeah, 2 to 4 weight. We have a lot of that there. So yeah, 2 to 4 weight is a really good way to experience all of these fish. But it's not the wand, it's the magician. So whatever you're comfortable with, I would definitely say bring that because help the fun factor. To target these fish, a lot of nymphing, dry fly fishing is an awful lot of fun. It's usually the biggest draw. We do a lot of tenkara. We thought that it was just going to be a passing fad some years ago, but it's become almost a vital part of our shop now. We do a lot of tenkara trips. We do a lot of tenkara-specific fly tying events. We have a local Tenkara USA pro that lives in the Asheville area, and he does a lot of trips with us and for us. So if that's something that you're interested in, we can cater to that as well. Why that went up in there. So delayed harvest and hatchery supported water. This is one of those designations where you've got to pay attention to the signs, the little diamond-shaped signs that are on the trees. It tells you a lot, like the really important parts of the water that you need to pay attention to when you go to West North Carolina. In delayed harvest, like right now, this time of year, it is single hook artificial fly only. That means that if you want to go and throw conventional gear and you're going to use a spinner, make sure you clip off 2 of those hooks on that treble hook because you will get busted if you do that. And that also means no night crawlers, nothing live. Single hook artificial only. And that starts the first Saturday in June and goes to the 1st of October, where you can actually catch and keep. So hence the name delayed harvest. Once June rolls around, a lot of the water that the state will stock will get to certain temperatures that's not conducive to a good trout habitat. So they're going to go belly up anyway. Might as well give the folks the opportunity to catch some fish, take it home, and have a good dinner. Yes?
Yeah, single hook only, can you use a dropper as well, or it's just one?
Great question. Yeah, you can. You've got to make sure that at least 12 inches separate the 2 flies. It's no longer considered a multi-hook rig once 12 inches separate the flies. Good question. So most DH water is stocked around 5 months out of the year. That's March, April, May. And then they take from June to October off to give you guys the opportunity to catch and keep. But once October 1 rolls around, October and November, they go back to stocking these. And populations of fish will differ between each one of the rivers. Some of them are bigger watersheds, and accept more fish. Some of them are smaller, and they kind of stock according to that. Hatchery-supported water is stocked intermittently throughout the year. There's not necessarily a set-in-stone schedule. For example, you can get on North Carolina Department of Natural Resources, and you can actually see they give a stocking schedule for the delayed harvest. They don't do that with the hatchery-supported. But hatchery-supported is where the state will go in and they'll put fish into these rivers that already has a really, a pretty good reproducing population of fish. They're just wanting to introduce new bloodlines, kind of, it's an augmentation to the already existing fish in there. So again, a lot of fish in that. It is closed from March 1 until the first Saturday in April, so that's coming up. That's the 1 month out of the year that they actually close the hatchery supported, and you're no longer allowed to fish that for that month. And it's just to give those trout the opportunity to acclimate and get used to their surroundings, spread out a little bit. So some of the pros with DH and hatchery supported is a lot of this water is super accessible. It's a very, very, very popular. It's very popular water to go to when you visit West North Carolina, because a lot of it will tend to parallel a road. There's a lot of pull-offs and everything. So for those of us that don't want to dedicate the time and effort needed to go after the wild fish, you can still go out and have a really fun day to experience West North Carolina, catch a lot of fish by going to these delayed harvest waters. One of the things I love most about delayed harvest water is it's great for teaching. It's great for learning. You know, coming over here and doing this presentation, I was thinking about, it can be, fly fishing can be daunting. It can be it can be very, very detailed. And for somebody that's being introduced to the sport and walking into it, you can get caught up in a whirlwind of information that almost drives you away from the sport sometimes. I've seen it happen. But it's you can, don't want to offend anybody, you can dummy it down and you can just learn the basics starting off and build onto that. And one of the great things to do is utilize this delayed harvest water. There's a lot of fish per river mile in a lot of these streams. It gives the opportunity to cast a feeding fish. And most importantly, it probably gives you an opportunity to fail at catching a fish, because that's the quickest way you're going to learn. It flattens out that bell curve and helps you get a better understanding of timing and reading water and everything. So it's a great teaching opportunity to visit the delayed harvest water. We got a couple of rivers, one in particular, the Tuckasegee, that gives the opportunity to wade and or float depending upon water release. Both of which gives you the opportunity to fish a lot of water, but kind of going back to what Forrest was saying, being in a boat gives you the opportunity to access water, see a lot of water, move over more fish, fresh fish. You get to cast to a lot more fish when you go and do a floating opportunity than you do a wading opportunity. But you can definitely have a standout day waiting on some of these delayed harvest water. I put this point on here, opportunity for several fish, but the quality tends to suffer. It's just a byproduct, you know. Sometimes those fish do get a little beat up in the raceways as they're raised, the raw spots on their nose, the underdeveloped pectoral fins. But after a while, after a couple of months of being in the water, they start to acclimate. Stuff starts coming around. They look a little bit better, and they start acting more like a wild fish. And they start taking more of the proper flies, so to speak. So on the first slide that I brought up, I was talking about we've got 5,000 miles of trout water, 4,000 of which is public. And so I'm going to go through a list of some of the rivers that we frequent. By no means is it the only rivers that we go to, but it's the ones that we tend to visit most often. As far as tailwaters are concerned, South Folsom, Watauga, and the Nantahala kind of rank up there as the ones that we frequent the most. And of those three, South Folsom and Watauga for sure. When I'm booking trips and I'm working with folks and helping them kind of set their day up and helping them, be introduced to the water that we have and the experiences that we can provide, I get asked a lot, where are we going? Or, which river are we going to be fishing? My response is always, we leave that to our guides. They're the ones that are out there every day. They're the ones that understand what's going on. And our guides will reach out to everybody a couple days in advance to introduce themselves and let you know what's going on. Kind of going back to that flexibility point that we put up a little bit earlier. You might be dead set on fishing River A, something's going to occur, weather might roll in, and you might have to call an audible and go to a different river. But these are typically the delayed harvest rivers that we probably frequent most often. The North Mills River, West Fork of the Pigeon, the Tuckasegee, East Fork of the French Broad River, and then the Big Laurel. Those are all fairly equidistant from around the shop, around 45 minutes to an hour drive from our main shop. So this is more of the wild water stuff. I pulled over and snapped a picture with my phone. That was 20 minutes from leaving my back door from my house to go fishing one day. It was just one of those really pretty mornings. But the vast majority of the water that we have in western North Carolina is going to be a lot of this wild water. Some of the ones that we've visited, or the national forests, or the parks that we can guide in. Cataloochee Valley, wonderful, beautiful place. It's where the state reintroduced elk back into the wild. It's a native species of mammal that we have there. It was hunted to extinction some time ago, but they've been reintroduced and they're starting to repopulate the area. And if you go fishing in the Cataloochee Valley, we've got a couple of guides that really love to go out there. You might run the risk of seeing a bull elk out there. The Great Smoky Mountains National Park, a lot of water in there, some beautiful, beautiful places. We frequent the Nantahala National Forest, the Shining Rock Wilderness, and the Pisgah National Forest. There's a lot of different water in there, and we spend a lot of time out there. And again, that's the smaller creeks, a little bit more difficult wading, a little bit more technical, but the payoff is some really beautiful fish. Guys, thank you so much.